Hi, Grandma Abuela here. I'm not in this video because I'm going to show you what I would do if I were building a shelter. If I was actually on a loan, there's two main things that I would do ahead of everything else. I would get a good supply of firewood, and as you can see, there's plenty of dead wood around here that I could gather up and make a pile of. So I'd get plenty of firewood. If I go farther up the hill, I'll find bigger branches, bigger trees. And then the next thing I would do, or at the same time, I would be building a shelter. I need a shelter that's going to keep me warm and protected from the wild animals. Now, I haven't actually found a place where I would want to build my shelter in this area. I'm actually quite near my house. But I'll show you what I would not do. What I would want. What I want is I want to find a place where at least one wall is already there. So, as you can see, this cliff looks like it would be perfect. It could be like the back wall of my shelter. The problem is, right there next to the cliff, the ground slopes. So my problem with that, where the ground slopes, is first of all, I'm not going to be lying on a flat place. And second of all, when it storms and rains, that water's going to run right down there into my shelter. So that's not going to be a good place. Another thing I want to watch out for is even if I find a place that's more flat, like right there's more flat, the water can still drain down off the top of those rocks onto my shelter. So I want to be sure and avoid something like that happening. Another thing that I need to watch out for, especially if I'm out here in the desert, is if you look right here where I'm standing, this looks like a nice little flat bed of rocks, and I've followed this. And I found some actually larger rocks if I go up that way. Down there you can see there's, decent sized rock, not large enough for a shelter. And it's fairly flat. The problem here is I'm standing in the middle of something called a wash. And what that means is that during a rainstorm, this thing can fill with water. And if you look up there, you can see that's the road, and this thing, I've seen it full of water that it would be over my head. I know that's hard to believe, but I've seen it where this thing is, from bank to bank filled with water, rushing down. It actually rushed down into the town and flooded part of the town one time. What causes that in the desert is if you have a really dry season, and we've had a dry season this year. I don't think it's rained at all the entire summer. But it's been hot. We've had temperatures up to 110 out here in our Nevada desert. And what that does is it actually bakes the ground. And then when we finally have a rainstorm, sometimes it rains harder than the ground can absorb it. And it just runs along the top of that ground. And it just gathers, and it actually forms a flash flood. That's what a flash flood is when it rains harder than the ground can absorb it. So we haven't had moisture for a really long time. It's been quite a while since we actually had a good sized flash flood, so I wouldn't be surprised if maybe this year sometime we have a flash flood. Another thing that can cause a flash flood is if it snows and we have a lot of snow that gathers up in the mountains, and then we get rain on top of it, which makes the snow melt too fast, and that also can cause a flash flood. One time we had one that flooded most of the town, and that's what caused that one. Anyways, back to the shelter. Obviously, I do not want to build a shelter anywhere in a wash like this, because if we get a flood, it's going to wash me away, and those flash floods can come fast and sudden. Now up there again, I've got some nice cliffs. I might actually be able, if I hike to the top of that mountain, I could probably build a fairly decent shelter up there. I might not have a cliff or a rock to back it up, but I would be on higher ground, so I wouldn't need to worry about getting flooded. The question I have then is, how close am I to my water source, and do I want to have to make that hike every day? If my water source is somewhere down here, do I want to hike up there? Whoa, that probably made you dizzy. Sorry about that. Do I want to hike up there? So those are things that I need to keep in mind as I'm building a shelter. I need to make sure that my shelter is built in a place where it's not going to be washed away or blown away by the weather. I need to make sure that it's a strong, sturdy shelter. And I actually need to make sure that it's accessible for me, that it's a place that I can get to, because one, I'm pretty lazy, and too. I don't want to have to be hiking up and down every single day just to get to water or whatever. So those are things to take into consideration as I'm building my shelter. But ideally, I would really like to be able to find like some sort of giant rock or boulder that I can use for the back wall of my shelter. Maybe if I could find an overturned log, I could use that for like the back wall of a shelter that's been there for, if the log's been there for quite some time. I don't know if you can see it from here, but I'm going to zoom in a little bit. There's a rock right there. Now that rock might do for part of a back wall of a shelter if it were on a more level spot. But as it is, it's on a hill, so water would rush right down and into my shelter. But those are things that I'm keeping an eye open for, is if I can find a place where maybe there's some rocks that I can use for a back wall, or at least rocks nearby that I can gather, because I want to be able to build a nice fireplace. I want to be able to have a sturdy structure. My plan for my shelter is I want to build a sort of log cabin type thing if I can. I'll use the tarp that I have with me for part of the roof, but I'm also going to cover that with branches so that it's further insulated. And then I intend to use rocks to build a fireplace, and those rocks will also help to reflect the heat back out into my shelter. I actually intend to build some sort of chimneys so that the smoke from my fire is vented up out of the shelter. Up there at the top of those cliffs, that might be a good place to build a shelter. Some of these cliffs, and I can't see any right now, have small caves in them. A cave would be good for a shelter, but you have to keep in mind that most caves are not empty caves. They are inhabited by other creatures. Snakes, bats, wild cats, mountain lion, a bear. I don't know. Just if you find a cave and you're thinking about using it for a shelter, keep in mind that there might be somebody that's already claimed that as their home, and so don't be too hasty to have that be your shelter. I hope this was helpful. Maybe sometime in the future I'll actually attempt to build a shelter. Don't know if that'll happen. I'm kind of a wimp when it comes to cold, and I think this is supposed to be our last nice day before the storms start coming in, the autumn storms, and it gets colder. But you know, if I can find a good place, I may attempt to build a shelter just to sort of show you what I like. Stay tuned. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section below, or email me at grandma1abuela@gmail.com. Wait, that's for my other YouTube stations. Sorry, grandmasurvives@gmail.com. grandmasurvives@gmail.com. Or grandma1abuela@gmail.com. I'll get it either way. But if you have something you want to say, ideas, questions, be sure and email me or leave it in the comments. Bye.